So good morning, everyone. Thanks to the organizers for having me here today. It's a pleasure. And since the transition from the early to the middle Bronze Age in the Southern Caucasus has been the major research topic of my PhD study, I thought to share with you my research and some preliminary results. Focus of this talk would be the attempt at reassessing this cultural stage from the material assemblage perspective, focusing on the typological analysis and classification of pottery. The analysis of this material class is fundamental in the attempt at defining relative chronologies, considering its frequent occurrence in different archaeological contexts. This operation, mostly based on published materials, is particularly needed at this stage, as new excavations and new material finds are becoming available. The correct attribution of material finds, supported by reliable radiocarbon dates and secure archaeological contexts, mostly from multi-period sites, will be an invaluable contribution to the process towards the comprehensive understanding of this transitional stage. The diffusion of kurgans is a long-term and widespread phenomenon, already but only sporadically attested in Transcaucasia from the Chalcolithic, if one excludes the evidence from Azerbaijan. It is, however, from the mid-end of the early Bronze Age that burials in kurgans became archaeologically predominant as a consequence of major social and economic transformations. In archaeological contexts, the first Bronze Age kurgans discovered were the ones excavated in southeastern Georgia in the 1930s by Boris Kuftin at Trialeti in the Tsalka Plateau, which he attributed to the Middle Bronze Age. A reassessment of the excavated materials and the discovery of new kurgan clusters allowed to recognize among them an earlier group of burial mounds. These were first attributed to the Kuroraxis culture, though a re-evaluation by Gogadze suggested to broadly associate these contexts generally to the early Bronze Age. Referring to these Trialeti kurgans, it was possible to group them under the label Early Bronze Age kurgans, in order to emphasize the chronological sequence and the cultural contrast between them and the other Middle Bronze Age barrows. This group is still currently acknowledged in the literature as the early Trialeti kurgans. However, this terminology is quite problematic. The term Early Bronze Age kurgans was replaced in the literature by the broader Early Kurgan culture, which has been further subdivided into an earlier Early Trialeti and Martkopi and a later Bedeni stage, defined also by the persistence of Kuroraxis cultural traits. The very first stage of the kurgan phenomenon is in fact strongly characterized by the mutual relationship and continuity of Kuroraxis cultural traits, as mostly detected in Georgian and Armenian settlements, with a gradual emergence and claim within the Kuroraxis culture of the kurgan phenomenon roughly around 2600 BC. It is already during the last stages of the Kuroraxis culture that we can notice preliminary traces of wealth and social ranking in the archaeological record, supporting that under the label Early Trialeti, we are actually referring to communities probably still associated with Kuroraxis cultural traits, which socially showed a preliminary tendency towards inequality and ranking. Within the earliest early Bronze Age kurgans is also included the Martkopi cultural cluster, later discovered and investigated by Japaridze in the Ulevari Valley and in the area around and between the villages of Martkopi and Akhalsopeli. A reassessment of Martkopi cultural traits allowed to identify similarities between Martkopi and early Trialeti barrows, mostly with reference to grave provisions. Martkopi pottery is characterized, for instance, by a same level of conservatism as identified in the early Trialeti assemblage, which was inherited in a few shape types from the late Kuroraxis. In terms of social developments, if with the term Martkopi we indicate community groups associated with first major evidence of power and wealth in archaeological contexts, as in exclusive burials in kurgans, depositions of wagons, precious metal objects, fineware pottery types, and warrior-like features as in weapons, then the association between Martkopi and early Trialeti groups seems reasonable. The specific association of early Trialeti finds in settlements further clarifies a few traits of this stage. Namely, early trialeti was likely a cultural phenomenon still associated with communities living in Kurgans settlements and in a broadly Kurgans lifestyle, who at a certain stage started slowly abandoning their homelands, embracing a more mobile lifestyle. The more problematic relation between Kurgans and Martkopi can be then explained within a transitional moment when these two cultures were probably both operating, one slowly moving towards its end, but still being the major cultural horizon, and one just emerging from the background. The slightly confused interpretation of this period was definitely distorted by the different influences and visibilities these two cultures held in this very precise moment in time. The second stage of the early Kurgan period witnessed the flourishing of the Kurgan phenomenon in South Caucasia and a steadier and more recognized role of local elites and leaders. This culture began around the middle second half of the third millennium BC, after probably a short period of coexistence with early Kurgan first groups, as demonstrated by mixed material finds in a few kurgans. The early Kurgan second period is defined by unique features and assemblages. Among prestigious items, precious metals were particularly common and manufactured with the introduction of new technologies. The uniformity of Bedeni sites and material finds across Transcaucasus defines a wide, intentional, and uniform expansion of the early Kurgan second cultures, reflecting a well-circumscribed trade network. A further impetus towards inequality and social ranking might have been accelerated by contacts connecting South Caucasian communities and their foreign counterparts. The end of the early Kurgan second period and consequently of the early Bronze Age is still very debated, but it can be tentatively placed around 2200-2100 BC, along with the flourishing of the Trialeti culture. The process towards increased inequality and heightened complexity further continued during the Middle and Late Bronze Ages, including emerging new powers. Archaeological contexts where early Kurgan materials are attested cover three major type sites, of which Kurgans are the majority. 73% of the site analyzed in my PhD research and updated with more recent data belong to the Bedeni period. 18% are Martkopi early Trialeti, and 8% only are late Kurgans. Settlements represent 17% of the early Kurgan sites analyzed, of which the majority, the 59%, belong to the late Kurgans period. In multi-period sites, early Kurgan architecture was mostly represented by ephemeral structures or features as pits. Among the settlements, 35% held Bedeni materials, and 5% only are Martkopi early Trialeti, number which probably needs revision as the occurrence of Martkopi materials in settlements and its attribution was probably confused sometimes with late Kurgans materials. Sanctuaries or cultic areas, the third type site, mostly belong to the Bedeni period. These sites are defined by occurrence of features interpreted as altars or cultic installations. In several cases, these features represent the only evidence of the early Kurgan occupation at one site. A brief consideration on the categories of sites just mentioned offers the impression, as we are already aware, that the early Kurgan period was characterized by a major tendency towards transhumance and semi-nomadism, though through maybe the occupation of seasonal campsites, of which unfortunately there is still no evidence in archaeology. The few Bedeni settlements known cover different altitudes and feature the occupation or reoccupation over time at the same site as seen in every settlement known. Among the various classes of material finds attributed to the last stages of the Kurgans culture and to the early Kurgan period, I would like to focus now on the reassessment of the pottery repertoire from publications. The late Kurgans pottery group represents an interesting case study, not only because of its relation to the Kurgans group, but also for its links to the early Kurgan phase. The majority of the pottery studies for this group come from Armenia and Georgia. Late Kurgans pottery is handmade with black surfaces, highly polished and usually decorated. Mineral tempering is defined by the use of different elements as rocks, minerals, and volcanic glass. Tempering, which was sorted and screened, usually included the same minerals found in the raw clay, varying according to the sources. Nevertheless, Analysis revealed that several minerals were intentionally added to the fabric, as obsidian, for instance. The early Trialeti pottery group, instead, has not been analyzed in its petrographic components yet. Early Trialeti pottery was handmade with highly burnished outer surfaces. It was always black in color and was decorated with incised geometric patterns. These vessels were found mixed with Marcopi and Bedeni pots in Kurgans or in Kuraxes settlements with late Kuraxes pots. A comprehensive reconsideration of this ceramic group, including also pots' formal features and archaeological contexts, seem to support the hypothesis that the early Trialeti pottery group is very similar to the late Kuraxes and the Marcopi ones. These groups appear to share a multiplicity of features, attempting at defining the early Trialeti pottery assemblage as a regional or local variation, mostly of late Kuraxes, but eventually also of Marcopi ceramic. Early Trialeti pottery can be best defined at this stage as a local variation of a same broader early Bronze Age pottery production. However, the difference between late Kuraxes and early Trialeti pottery decoration patterns and the exclusive association of early Trialeti and Marcopi vessels types in Kurgans confirms the association of early Trialeti and Marcopi groups. Only one major ware type is documented in the Marcopi ceramic assemblage. This can be labeled fine ware, and it is represented by vessels held in kurgans or very seldom found scattered in settlements. Marcopi pottery was handmade, black in color with burnished or polished external surfaces, frequently decorated. The fabric of the Marcopi sherds analyzed from a macroscopic point of view is dense with finely grained mineral inclusions. The preliminary macroscopic analysis conducted in 2014 is supported by very little archaeometric studies. The macroscopic analysis of samples held at the Georgian National Museum allowed to further determine vessels firing. Marcopi pots have generally a slightly oxidized core and reduced edges, or oxidized and reduced external surfaces. The early Kurgan second pottery group type is characterized by two major ware types. The Bedeni fine ware type represents a highly distinctive and peculiar ceramic class, alternatively named tableware or metallic ware, in reference to the silvery shiny outer surfaces of some of these pots. Vessels included in this group are all handmade, possibly finished off by means of a slow potter's wheel, are black or buff in color, burnished or highly polished, and frequently decorated. These vessels are characterized by a compact fabric and a dense paste. The temper is always mineral, and inclusions were so finely grained that they are sometimes not visible to the eye. The coarse ware type group is well attested from settlements. In Kurgans, the presence of this ware type is limited, probably due to the specific daily use of these vessels. This ware type can be alternatively labeled as cooking, storage, or common ware. All the vessels were handmade, buff in color, with sporadic decorated surfaces, usually with combed patterns. Pots of this ware type were mostly fired in oxidized atmosphere, and the temper was mostly mineral. For the aims of this workshop, I would like to illustrate the pottery shape types identified for the early Kurgan period. Most of the data here presented refers to published materials, though several samples have been reviewed by autoptic analysis during several study seasons in Georgia. The early Kurgan first repertoire, grouping in this typology early Trialeti and Marcopi vessels, as already explained the reason why, is characterized by 5 major shape types. Surrounded by a red square are Marcopi pots found in association with Bedeni finds, while blue squares are for Marcopi mixed with early Trialeti materials. Mugs can be divided into 4 main shape types, usually decorated with incised geometric motifs. A1 includes mugs with mid-girth carination and a narrow raised base with 1 vertical handle. The decoration of the mug from the Kurgan of Kovle, letter B in red, is a hybrid as it features rounded motifs on the body, more typical of Kuraxes vessels, and grooves on the shoulder, as in Bedeni pots. Marcopi A2 are characterized by an emphasized girth with a low carination, accentuated by a bend, with 1 vertical handle. A3 are mugs defined by a molded large bend around the girth, larger than in A2 mugs, while marked copy A4, attested in one sample only preserved at the Kurgan of Noroshakan in Armenia, has a higher carination. Pitchers can be arranged in 4 main shape types. B1 includes pitchers with rounded body and narrow neck, biconical with a slightly concave shoulder. All these pots are provided with one handle above the girth. B2 have an exaggerated girth emphasized by a large decorated band. B3 are pitchers with a sharp carinated mid-girth and a high shoulder, while marked copy B4 are biconical with a large high girth. Jars can be divided according to their size and shape. C1 are large jars and have an exaggerated girth with a sharp carination. The example from marked copy Kurgan number 2 at the bottom of the screen has a small additional feature attached onto the upper part of the body close to one of the handles. This feature has a rounded, slightly concave upper surface and a hemispherical lower part whose function is unknown. Marked copy C2 is characterized by an emphasized large mid-girth. 4 major shape types are identified for the open pots class. Marked copy D1 are open pots with a mid-girth, narrow band, and a narrow raised base. D2 are large open pots with a squatted concave girth with a narrow base. D3 are open pots with an exaggerated girth and sharp carination, which is generally quite high, but can also be lower. And D4 have a convex concave profile. Storage jars can be divided into 2 shape types. Marked copy E1 and E2 feature squatted jars with an exaggerated mid-girth, higher or lower. E1 jars in particular have a narrow neck and 2 handles just below. Bedeni pottery includes 6 major shape types. Mugs are definitely the most common shape type attested, which can be classified in at least 11 types. I will definitely not go through all these types, but I will describe some of the most peculiar shapes. Among those are A1 mugs with lower sharp carination and conical upper body. A small variant, A1A, includes mugs provided with an additional pierced cone-shaped spout pointing upwards, placed on the upper part of the body. A2 are biconical mugs with a mid-girth sharp carination. Mugs of the A4 type are also manufactured in courseware and have an almost cylindrical body with slightly curved walls, while the finest mugs of the A5 type are cylindrical in shape and are provided with single and or double handles. Quite interesting are also miniature mugs between 4 and 8 centimeters high, as in A7 and A8, which features respectively a spherical body and a narrow neck, or a cylindrical body with a narrow base. A10 includes shallow, flattened mugs with exaggerated girth and narrow neck, and A11 are typical early Kurgan second tankards with a globular body and 2 spurred handles. Bowls are tested only in 2 shape types, both are tested from settlements, the first of which are shallow bowls manufactured in courseware with one horizontal pierced tub handle placed on the upper part of the body. B2 shallow bowls instead are characterized by a curved concave profile narrowing towards the base. Jugs are almost exclusively manufactured in fine ware, and 3 major shape types were identified. C1 are characterized by a cylindrical high neck with a globular slightly squatted body and 1 handle above it. C2 are 2 jugs linked on the body with a horizontal handle. The body of these vessels is linked by a hold passage, which might have allowed liquids to pass from one vessel to the other. C3, finally, are jugs with a cylindrical neck and a spherical body. 3 major shape types can be detected for open pots. D1 are pots with a globular body, 2 handles from the rim to the shoulder, and a narrow flat base, mostly manufactured in courseware. D2 have straight vertical or oblique walls to the base, while D3 are wide-mouthed globular open pots with averted ledge-like rims and 2 handles, most frequently spurred and even double. The last shape types include jars, which have been subdivided into 3 major types. E1 with spherical body and short neck. E2 jars have a more distinct neck and an elongated curved body, while E3 have a slightly larger mouth and a short neck. Bigger than this are storage jars, of which 4 main types can be identified, all manufactured in fine and coarse ware, even though coarse jars are more frequent. F1 are elongated pots with a short, narrow neck. F2 are slightly squatted jars with an exaggerated girth and narrow neck. The example shown has 2 handles of the eyelet type. F3 are tall, cylindrical jars with a flat base. And F4 is a very peculiar shape type, attested at Bericol Debbie only, which has an ovoid body, a flat, narrow base, 1 horizontal handle, and features 1 pierced hole with a functional purpose, as these kinds of vessels were employed for the production of dairy products. Other peculiar and unique shape types are scoops, manufactured in coarse ware, attested in a very few examples from settlements, and lids, of which, to my knowledge, are currently attested only the samples recently excavated at Rabati. Finally, I think it is extremely interesting to remind that within the early Kurgans, we have evidence of vessels and containers made of organic materials as wood, which is definitely a unique class of objects, which can be a hint towards all the rest of the early Kurgan material provisions, which unfortunately did not survive in archaeological contexts until today. We mostly see wooden containers as toiletries boxes and medicine chests, tools, pieces of furniture, but in particular, we have objects which imitates pottery or the other way around, as the wooden tripod from Bedeni Kurgan number 5 and wooden square box from Bedeni number 10. I guess this evidence of light equipment versus heavy pottery vessels were probably best suitable for more mobile communities, as also Kurorax's people left heavy pots behind them in their settlements before abandoning them. To conclude, the transition from the early to the Middle Bronze Age is a much debated topic, as this workshop shows, which still needs locally and at a larger scale, a more clear use of terminology, a clear as possible understanding of material culture and of archaeological contexts, as well as a set of reliable absolute dates. Thank you very much.